Okay, so the process of breaking down big molecules into much smaller components, it's called digestion. So digestion begins in your mouth. So whenever you're, eating, I don't know, chicken or something like that, right? You're using your teeth molars to actually chew and break down that chicken. But even within, your saliva, you actually have enzymes that allow you to break down those proteins into its individual amino acids. And so you swallow that entire thing, right? You swallow that, and then it goes into your stomach. And in your stomach, you actually have hydrochloric acid, which is like one of the most strongest acids that we have here on Earth. And the purpose of that is actually to help you break down those proteins into even smaller components. So that way, your cells within the body can actually absorb that. You can actually use them to build more proteins or more complex carbohydrates or lipids or fats. So in your body, all kinds of reactions are happening. Some of them are actually building, let's say, for example, new proteins, and other ones are actually breaking down proteins into amino acids. So when we refer to the term metabolism, so metabolism is basically all the chemical reactions that are happening in your body, whether we're building proteins or whether we're breaking down proteins. So catabolic reactions are reactions that are breaking down big molecules such as proteins, such as carbohydrates, into its individual components. So essentially what we're doing here is that we're breaking the bonds that are keeping the amino acids bonded together. Anabolic reactions, it's the opposite of that. So anabolic reactions, we're building big proteins from its individual amino acids. So in this case, we're actually building bonds. And it doesn't matter if you are building new proteins or if you're breaking down proteins. Both of those reactions require the assistance of very specialized proteins, proteins that we call enzymes. And in a minute, we're going to be discussing about how does an enzyme work. But an enzyme has little pockets that we call the active site. So in those little pockets, that's where substrates, and when we refer to substrate, it's basically the molecule that binds to the active site of the enzyme. So a substrate can be proteins, can be carbohydrates, or it can be the individual amino acids. So the substrate binds into the active site. And if this is a catabolic reaction, what's going to happen is that we're going to put a strength into the bond so that way we can break it, and so that way we can have that individual amino acid. And in anabolic reaction, we do the opposite. What happens is that the substrate binds to those little pockets, and then we bring both of those molecules close together so that way we can form a bond. So let's talk more about enzyme. So an enzyme, it's a very specialized protein. It is a protein that makes a reaction happen much faster. And the reason why it makes a reaction go much faster is because it lowers what we call the activation energy. And I mean, we'll go in detail about what we mean by activation energy. Now, enzymes are basically essential and are crucial to the survival of organisms. In fact, there are diseases that are caused because certain individuals lack an enzyme. So let's talk more about an enzyme. So enzymes have pockets, little holes, if you will, places where something can bind. Okay? Again, an enzyme has those little pockets where something can bind. And that specific pocket is what we call the active site. So what binds to those pockets, it's what we call the substrate. So substrate, it's the molecule that binds to the active site. So let me give you some examples of substrates. Substrates can be proteins, substrates can be carbohydrates, substrates can be lipids or fats, or they can also be, for example, the individual amino acids or the individual glucoses. Okay? So catalyst, it's basically the process of speeding a chemical reaction, and this is done by enzymes. So the reason why a reaction happens much faster is because we are lowering the energy that is required to make that reaction. So a typical silly example that I use in my class in order to teach my students how to enzyme works is that imagine that you have a broken leg. Okay, so you have a broken leg, so you're in pain. Okay, so you go to the hospital, and now imagine, that the hospital it's in this building, and this building has 20 floors, and for some reason, somebody decided to build the hospital on the last floor, on the 20th floor. Okay, again, you have a broken leg. Okay, so there's two options. Option number one, you can take the stairs. You can take the stairs all the way to the 20th floor. Remember, you have a broken leg here. Now, wouldn't you agree with me that if you take the stairs, it's going to require a lot of energy? And the second thing is that it's going to take you a lot of time to reach the 20th floor. This is how a reaction would happen without the use of an enzyme. A reaction can happen without an enzyme, but as you can see, it's going to require a lot of energy and it's going to take a lot of time. Now, the second option that we have is to use an elevator. Now, to use the elevator, all you have to do is just press a button and it's going to take you up to the 20th floor. Wouldn't you agree with me that it takes less energy and it's also much faster? And the beautiful part about using the elevator is that it can go up and up, up and down, up and up and down, like several times. And it's the same thing that happens to an enzyme. An enzyme can be used for the same reaction many, many, many times without the enzyme being used up. Again, the purpose of an enzyme is to make a reaction happen much faster because it lowers the activation energy, the energy that is required to make a reaction happen, and the enzyme can be used over and over and over again. Now, the thing about enzymes is that they're very specific. They can only do one specific reaction. If you're doing a different reaction, then you're going to use a different enzyme. Again, enzymes are very specific. For each reaction, you will require a different type of enzyme. And the reason for that is because, remember, shape matters when it comes to science. Each enzyme has a very specific shape, and that's why they can only do one specific reaction. Okay, so now let's talk about micronutrients. So micronutrients are also nutrients that our body requires, but those nutrients are required in lower amounts. So this is what we call them micronutrients. And some examples of micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. So what's the purpose of those macronutrients? So in our body, we also have enzymes that they don't have the proper shape. And so what happens is these macronutrients actually bind to the enzyme and they give the enzyme the proper shape so that way substrate can actually bind and we can make a reaction to happen much faster. Okay, so let's continue talking about macronutrients. So some examples of macronutrients are minerals and vitamins. So what's the difference between those two? So minerals are what we call inorganic molecules. And if you guys remember, an inorganic molecule, it's a molecule that doesn't have a carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon bond. So it doesn't have a carbon backbone, if you will, right? And it doesn't have a carbon to hydrogen bond. So some examples of minerals are zinc, copper, and iron. Vitamins, on the other hand, they are organic. So which means that they have a bunch of carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon bonds, and they have at least one carbon to hydrogen bond. So they have basically a carbon backbone. But it doesn't matter if we're talking about minerals, it doesn't matter if we're talking about vitamins. Their function is basically the same. Their function is similar, that they bind to an enzyme, so that way the enzyme can have the proper shape. Okay, so let's continue talking more about the peanut butter because I really enjoy this project. I think it basically worked amazing. Okay, so here we have a graph, and in this graph, on the y-axis, we have uh, the number of children as a percentage who catch up to their growth, so essentially who recover. On the x-axis, we have the duration of the home therapy in weeks. So what we can see is that with the first treatment, 78% of the 170 children who only ate the corn, soy, flour diet recovered. 78%, it's a decent number. Okay, so for the second treatment, so 78% of the 96 children who ate a small amount of the peanut butter in addition to the regular diet, they actually recover. So with the first two treatments, both of them obtained 78%. Now, for the third treatment, so that's a treatment with the peanut butter, look at this. 95% of the children who ate the peanut butter, they actually recover. So this is amazing. 95%, it's huge. 95%, it's great. So now that we know that the peanut butter works, do you think that there's going to be anybody who's going to be against using the peanut butter? Especially when we're talking about that it can save human lives. Especially when we're talking about that it can save the children's life. Do you guys think that there's going to be anybody against it? And the answer to that is yes. There's going to be people, or there were people who were against it. And at the end of the day, it comes down to money, right? Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is that the peanut butter was going to replace all the other treatments. And people who were producing the other treatments, obviously they're not happy, and they're going to fight for that. And, that's basically a question that I want to leave you with. And in this case, we're talking about human lives. Okay, so we're talking about saving lives of the little ones. Why would anybody go against a treatment that we know that it works very effectively?